I've been diving for a living since I was 22. North Sea first, then the Gulf, and for the last year and a half, the coast up here in British Columbia. It's the same work wherever you go. Somebody lost something at the bottom of the water and somebody else wants it documented, salvaged, photographed, or gone. You go down, you do the job, you come back up. You don't ask why the thing sank in the first place. That's not the contract. This one was for a firm out of Vancouver called Pacific Basin Recovery. I'd worked for them twice before, no trouble either time. The job was a Coast Guard cutter, the Resolute Bay, sitting at 140 feet in Nootka Passage, gone down in a storm 2 years back. They wanted the cargo manifest photographed for the insurance file. That was it. Nothing about it read as strange on paper. The water taxi out of Gold River took 4 hours, straight up the coast, nothing but water and rock the whole way. There's a logging road that comes close, but it ends 12 kilometers short of the fjord mouth, so the only way in is by sea. I sat in the back of the boat and watched the shoreline get steeper and darker and more empty the further north we went. When we came around the last headland, the barge was just sitting there, the Meridian, flat-decked, anchored dead center in the passage, with the walls of the fjord rising up on both sides of it, dark and close, and going straight up out of the water. No other boats anywhere, no lights on shore. Randy Carr was on deck when I came aboard. He shook my hand once, hard, and let go. Kingston Johnston? That's right. Randy Carr, Site Super. He looked at my gear bag like he was counting the straps. Dive briefings 0730, first dive right after. That was most of what he said to me for the first hour. He showed me the barge in about 4 minutes flat, galley, equipment bay, my bunk, his cabin at the stern with a padlock on the door that he didn't explain and I didn't ask about. Early 50s, solid build, spine straight, gray hair cut close. Not much behind the eyes that gave anything away. Ex-military, tight with information, doesn't waste a word he doesn't have to spend. I didn't think much of it. We ate a little that evening in the galley, some kind of stew out of a pot he must have started before I got there. He had a satellite phone clipped to his belt the whole time, and he never once set it down, not even to eat. Dives on the cargo bay first, he said. Manifest's supposed to be bolted to the forward bulkhead. Get that, we're most of the way there. How's visibility been? Fine. I've worked for Pacific Basin before, a couple times. I know. He didn't say anything after that, and he didn't ask me anything either. I finished my stew and let it go. After we ate, I went down to the equipment bay to check my gear before turning in. It's a habit from a long time back. Tank pressure, regulator, BCD inflation, dive computer charge, the seal on the camera housing. All of it came back clean. There's a porthole in the equipment bay that looks out on the passage, and by the time I was done, the water outside had gone black. Flat black, no wind on it at all. The walls of the fjord had disappeared into the dark above the waterline so that all you could see was the little bit of shoreline right at the surface. And past that, nothing. It doesn't feel like open water. It feels like being inside something. I went to my bunk. The barge didn't move much on its anchor, no wind to speak of. Every so often I heard a line creak somewhere on deck, and once faint, Carr's boots crossing the corridor toward his cabin, and then his door, and then nothing. I lay there a while, listening to how quiet the passage was. The dive briefing was set for 7:30. Cargo bay, manifest, photographs, a straightforward job, nothing more. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary. The briefing at 7:30 took about 2 minutes. Carr laid it out standing at the stern rail with his coffee, not sitting. Cargo bay first. Manifest clipboards in a waterproof sleeve bolted to the forward bulkhead. Photograph it and the surrounding cargo. I geared up, checked my regulator, and went in at 8:05. The Resolute Bay was sitting upright on the silt at 140 feet. Hull breached along the port bow, the way you'd expect from a big wave or a collision. Everything else about her was ordinary. I worked the cargo bay in a grid and found the clipboard exactly where the briefing said it would be. I photographed it from 4 angles and surfaced at 9:20 with a full card. Carr ran through the images on his laptop at the rail, thumb on the trackpad, no expression. "First dive is satisfactory," he said, and closed it. I ate. I checked my gear for the morning. Second dive was the forward section, bridge, radio room, crew quarters, standard survey work, nothing in the tasking that should have kept me up, and it didn't. I went in at 7:40. The bridge door was jammed open enough to pass through, and I photographed the helm, the chart table, and the instrument panel. Aft of that were the crew quarters, 4 berths, personal effects still sitting where the men had left them. Someone had pinned a photograph above one of the bunks. I photographed that too. The radio room was 40 minutes in. The door was jammed half open by debris, same as the bridge, and I worked my light through the gap before I went in. Equipment still mounted to the walls. Chart table upright. The radio itself was dead, its housing cracked down one side. I photographed all of it. Clipped to the wall beside the radio was a document pouch, the waterproof kind, sealed at the top with a fold-over clasp. Coast Guard crews keep their logs in those. I unclipped it. Inside was a logbook, watch officer's log by the cover. I opened it there in the radio room, holding it steady under my dive light, and started reading from the back. The last 3 entries were close together, 5 days apart from first to last, ending 4 days before she went down. The first one was in a clean, even hand. It logged an acoustic anomaly on the hull sonar, a pulse, repeating on a steady interval, coming from below the seafloor. Not geological, not any pipeline or cable route on record in the passage. The entry called it origin unknown, possible anthropogenic source, below seabed. The second entry was the same hand. The pulse had held for 36 hours straight by then. 90 seconds between each one, timed out to the second. The crew had tried to raise the Canadian Hydrographic Service and Defense Pacific to report it. Nothing back on either channel. The signature line under both said, Joey Mitchell, watch officer. The third entry wasn't his hand. Tighter, harder pressed into the page, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry or gripping the pen too hard to write easy. It said, it answered. 310 feet, 042. No name under it, no rank, nothing else on the page. I read it twice under the light, because the first time through I told myself I'd misread it, and the second time it said the same thing. Then I closed the log and sealed it back in the pouch and finished photographing the room. I surfaced with the manifest images and the logbook both. Carr was waiting at the rail when I came up the ladder, same as he had been the day before. I handed him the pouch without saying what was in it. It was a recovered document. That was true, and it was all I gave him. He unclipped it, pulled out the log and opened it standing right there at the rail. He read 2 pages. His face didn't move, not once, not even at the last one, and I was watching for it. He closed the book. The logbook is a recovered government document, he said. It enters federal chain of custody from this point. He carried it below to his cabin. I stood on deck with my fins still in my hand, salt water running off the wetsuit onto the boards, and a few seconds later, I heard the safe close. I ate lunch alone on the deck, cold sandwiches from the barge's galley, and I checked my regulator and my gauges for the next day's dive the way I check them every day. Because a man who skips that step because his head is somewhere else is a man who doesn't come back up. I didn't ask Carr about the logbook. I told myself it was professional habit. But it wasn't the whole reason, and I knew it wasn't, sitting there with the sandwich going stale in my hand. The whole reason was the sound the safe made when it closed. A safe closing is just a latch. This one sounded like a decision. Carr stayed in his cabin most of the afternoon. I saw him once coming out to check something on the compressor, and he didn't look at me any different than he had the day before. Same flat face, same nothing in it. I reviewed the morning's photographs on my dive computer, scrolling through them at the little folding table on deck. Cargo bay, manifest clipboard, the sleeve bolted to the bulkhead. Clean images, good exposure, nothing in any of them but a dead ship doing what dead ships do, sitting still and rotting slow. I didn't pull up the shots from inside the radio room. I hadn't taken any. The logbook wasn't mine to photograph. It was Carr's now, in a safe in a locked cabin, and that was where it was going to stay. The afternoon went by like that. Quiet, ordinary. The kind of quiet that on any other job I would have called good. I couldn't sleep that night. I don't know exactly why. I've spent plenty of nights on plenty of boats, and I sleep fine on most of them. Tired the way you get tired doing this work. Tired enough that a bunk feels like a gift. This one I lay in for maybe an hour, staring at the underside of the bunk above mine, and then I got up and went out to the rear deck because staring at a ceiling wasn't doing anything for me. The fjord at 1 a.m. is its own kind of dark. No moon that night, or the moon was somewhere behind the walls of the passage because I couldn't find it. The barge's running lights threw a little cone of yellow onto the water right off the stern and past, that there was nothing. No shoreline, no ridgeline, just black going up into more black. The water didn't move. I've never been anywhere that still. Even a lake moves. I sat down on a coil of line near the stern rail and let my eyes adjust and didn't think about much of anything. That was when I heard him. Carr's cabin was right there at the stern, a few feet from where I was sitting, and the porthole was cracked open, maybe 2 inches, letting the cabin air out into the night. I hadn't noticed it was open until his voice came through it. He was on the satellite phone. I knew his voice by then, that clipped even register he used for everything, and it hadn't changed at all for this call. No hurry in it, no wait. "The logbook is secured," he said. A pause. I couldn't hear the other side of it, whoever was on the other end of that line, wherever they were. "Breach is confirmed at the 042 bearing." Another pause, longer this time. "Do not send the coast team. I need 48 hours. Then nothing. No goodbye that I heard. Just the sound of him setting the phone down on something hard, and then quiet again. The ordinary shipboard quiet of a man alone in his cabin. I sat very still on that coil of line and didn't move for a long time. Breach confirmed. 042 bearing. Do not send the coast team. I turned those words over the way you'd turn over a rock to see what's under it, except there was nothing under it, just more rock. I tried to make it mean something small. A breach could be a hull breach, could be paperwork language for damage already logged 2 years ago on a ship already sitting at the bottom of the passage. The bearing could be a survey line, a grid reference, nothing more sinister than the numbers on a chart. The coast team could be anybody. Coast Guard auxiliary, an insurance adjuster. A second dive crew Pacific Basin didn't want stepping on our contract. I tried those explanations on the way you try on a coat that doesn't fit, and none of them sat right on my shoulders. What stopped me from being sure of anything was the tone. Carr hadn't sounded alarmed. He hadn't sounded like a man reporting an emergency. He'd sounded like a man confirming a delivery date. That evenness cut both ways. It could mean the thing he was talking about really was small, routine, nothing to raise his voice over. Or it could mean he was the kind of man who never raised his voice over anything, no matter what it was. I had one half of a phone call and no way to get the other half. I stayed out on that rear deck for another hour, watching the black water do nothing at all, listening for anything else through that cracked porthole and hearing only the compressor cycling somewhere below and, once, the creak of the barge shifting against its anchor line. The passage walls stayed invisible above the waterline the whole time. Before it got light, I went back to my bunk. I lay there listening to the kind of silence that isn't really silence. The low hum of the barge's systems, my own breathing, and underneath all of it, the stillness of the passage itself pressing in through the hull. I turned the words over again and again, trying to make them mean something I could file away as somebody else's problem, and I could not make them mean anything safe, and I could not make them mean anything certain either. I went in at 8:15. The tasking was the cargo bay, the last of it. Photograph what I hadn't gotten the first day, close out the manifest job, be done. I told myself I wasn't thinking about the logbook. I told myself that twice on the ladder down, which is usually a sign you're thinking about something. The water was clean at the surface and got greener fast. By 110 feet, I was following the hull line the way I had the first morning, one hand near the plate, light angled down and ahead, and that was when I saw the silt was wrong. It wasn't scattered the way silt scatters. It ran. A furrow, maybe 4 feet across, cut northeast off the wreck and away from it, straight, the kind of straight that current doesn't make, and an anchor drag doesn't make either. An anchor drag wanders. This didn't wander. I held there a second with my light on it, telling myself it was some old cable trench, some survey line, something with a name and a reason. I followed it. I know that wasn't the tasking. I know what Carr would say if I told him, which is nothing, because I didn't tell him. I finned along the furrow with the wreck behind me, and my air ticking down the way it always does. And the furrow didn't stop, it just kept going out past the edge of what my light could hold, so I kept going with it. It ended at a depression, round, maybe 30 feet across, and I hung above the rim of it and did not go down into it. The silt at the edge wasn't scattered outward the way an impact throws material. It was pushed up, mounded, like something underneath it had come up through and stopped right there. Not fallen, risen. I took the pictures. Rim first, wide, then closer, then the center, which sat darker than the silt around it, deeper or hollowed or just holding shadow in a way the rest of the floor didn't. I worked around it slow, not fully trusting what I was looking at, wanting it on record from every side I could manage before my air made the decision for me. 8 minutes, maybe. I didn't go in. Then I turned and started up. Carr was at the rail when I came over the ladder. He didn't ask before I said it. Visibility was poor, I told him. I ran it short. He looked at me for about as long as it takes to decide not to ask a second question. Fine, he said and went below. No follow-up, no request to see the photographs first. Nothing about the cargo bay I hadn't finished documenting. I sat there with my tank still strapped to my back, water running off the suit onto the deck, and thought about how a man who didn't care about the manifest anymore wasn't going to care much about my dive time either. I pulled the computer off my wrist and thumbed through what I'd shot. There it was on the small screen, flattened and gray but unmistakable. The rim was mounded the same way I remembered it, pushed up from underneath. The center darker than it should have been, and running back from it toward the wreck, straight as a rule, the furrow that had led me there in the first place. I sat on the deck a long time looking at that picture, the tank still on my back, the water still running off me, not calling Carr, not putting the computer down. I stayed on that photograph until the light on my dive computer dimmed to save power, then went below and dried off and waited for the barge to go quiet. Carr's cabin door had been shut since dinner. No light under it. No sound but the generator. And once, the click of the satellite phone being set down on something hard. I went to the chart plotter after that. It sat at a little station forward of the galley, a laptop screwed into a bracket and wired into the barge's own navigation suite, which let me pull GSC layers over live sonar to see what was under us before we put a diver on it. Nobody used it much. Carr had shown me the basics my first morning, mostly so I could confirm depth and bottom composition before a dive, and then he'd left it alone. I typed in the bearing, 042, run out from the Resolute Bay's last known position, the number written in a hand that wasn't Mitchell's, at the bottom of a logbook that was supposed to be locked in a safe 2 doors down from where I was sitting. The line drew itself across the screen, northeast, up through the fjord, into the deep water where the passage narrows and the walls come in close on both sides. I let the cursor sit where the line ended. The geological survey layer said what you'd expect. Silt over basalt, no features of note. 290 feet, give or take, at that point in the passage. Nothing that would put a pulse into a hull-mounted sonar. Nothing that would leave a furrow 4 feet wide and a depression 30 feet across with its rim pushed up from underneath. I sat with that for a minute. Then I found the other layer. It was buried under a folder name that meant nothing to me, a partition the software hadn't cleared when somebody updated the nav suite, data nobody had bothered to clear in years. 1987. A military survey, Department of National Defense, coastal mapping. I shouldn't have been able to open it. There was no reason a civilian salvage barge's navigation computer should have had access to it at all. I opened it anyway. The notation sat right at the coordinate the bearing pointed to, small white text against the chart's blue. Sealed borehole, DND, 1971, depth 310 feet. I read it twice. 310 feet. The same number Mitchell had written at the bottom of that logbook, in that tighter hand, the one that wasn't quite his own anymore by the last page. It answered, 310 feet. 042. I knew the coast was full of things from that period nobody talked about. Hydrophone arrays strung along the strait, sonar buoys anchored and forgotten, a whole system built to listen for Soviet submarines that the government never put on a public chart. I'd heard stories about that kind of infrastructure from other divers. None of it explained a sealed borehole. A hydrophone listens. It sits there and takes in whatever passes it. A borehole goes down. I was still turning that over when I heard the latch on Carr's cabin door. He came into the corridor without hurrying and stopped behind me. I didn't turn around. I could see him in the black of the screen's edge, a shape standing there in the low light, looking at the bearing line and the notation the same way I'd been looking at it. He didn't say anything for a while. "You should get some sleep before the morning dive," he said. His voice was even. It always was. It could have meant nothing more than what it said, or it could have meant something else entirely, and I had no way, sitting there, of telling which. I didn't answer him. He went back into his cabin. The door clicked shut, softer than the safe had, but final in the same way. I sat alone at the plotter with the bearing line still cutting northeast across the screen and the notation glowing where it ended. Sealed borehole, DND, 1971, depth 310 feet, and Carr's door stayed closed behind me. I slept in pieces and woke up before Carr did, or before Carr came out. He found me on deck with my coffee going cold in my hand. "Morning dive's canceled," he said. I waited for the rest of it. "Second vessel's inbound, Pacific Basin asset. You stand down until it arrives." "How long?" 6 hours. He said it the way he said everything, level, no room in it for a follow-up, but I gave him one anyway. "Where's it coming from?" "Repositioned from another job." He didn't say which job, didn't say a port, didn't say anything I could have written down. He turned and went back toward his cabin like the conversation had already ended before I'd finished asking it. I went to the chart plotter. The AIS traffic layer took a few seconds to populate. Little green diamonds crawling across a mostly empty screen, fishing boats farther south, a tanker way out past the shelf. I found the one that had to be ours. It was moving toward us at a steady clip, and I pulled its track backward, the way you'd rewind a tide. It didn't come from Victoria. It didn't come from Prince Rupert. It didn't come from anywhere with a dock. The track started in open water, well offshore, past the shelf, in a stretch of the Pacific that doesn't have a name most people would recognize. And it just began there, like the boat had switched its transponder on in the middle of nowhere instead of leaving a harbor. I stood there a long time looking at it. A repositioned asset comes from another job. Another job is at a coordinate, a rig, a wreck, a port. It doesn't come from a patch of open water with nothing on the chart around it. That's a place you sit. And the track's start time didn't sit right either. I ran it back and it went further than it should have, further back than last night, further back than cars call through the porthole. The boat had been out there before any of it, before the logbook came up in my hands, before Carr closed the safe. It had been waiting. I looked at the ETA again. 6 hours. I looked at the bearing line still sitting on the screen from the night before, cutting northeast, ending at the notation I already knew by heart. Sealed borehole, 1971, 310 feet. I had one tank left from the day before, already checked, already staged by the ladder. I'd have to log a dive plan for it, and Carr would ask when, and I already knew I wasn't going to answer that question before I went into the water. I wasn't going to give him 6 hours to decide what happens to me before that boat gets here. I didn't log anything. I carried the tank to the portside ladder myself. My hands were steady doing it. Not fast, steady. Cold has a way of making you slow down whether you want to or not. This time I wanted it to. Slow is how you don't make a mistake at depth. Carr's cabin door stayed shut. I got into my gear at 9:40, checked my computer, checked my gauge, and checked it again, my hands needing something to do. At 9:55, I went over the side. The barge's hull went white and then gray above me, and then it was just a shape, getting smaller, getting less like something that could help me. Nobody up there knew I was in the water, and nobody had a time to expect me back. I leveled off and turned onto the bearing. 042. I started down. The descent took 22 minutes. I watched the depth numbers roll on my computer the whole way down, because there wasn't much else to watch. Past 200 feet, the passage walls came in close enough that the ambient noise just stopped. No current, no surface slap, nothing. I've dived fjords before. I know what that kind of quiet sounds like. This wasn't that. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was more like the water was holding still on purpose, the way a room goes quiet when everybody in it is listening for the same thing. At 290 feet, my light found the basalt, and then it found the cap. 4 feet across, steel bolted flush into the rock. Stamped along the rim was a designation I didn't recognize and a date, 1971. It wasn't sitting flush anymore. Something had pushed it up from underneath. 2 of the 4 bolts had sheared clean through, the metal bright where it had torn. The other 2 had bent outward, like fingers pried back from something they were trying to hold shut. The cap sat canted on what was left of them, tilted enough to leave a gap along one edge, maybe 8 inches, dark all the way through. I put my glove against the basalt beside it. Warm, not hot, just warm, the way a rock is warm after a day in the sun, except there was no sun down here and hadn't been for 290 feet of black water. I held my hand there for a few seconds to be sure I wasn't imagining it through the neoprene. I wasn't. I got my camera up and took the cap from 3 angles, then the sheared bolts close, then the gap. That was when I heard it. It came through the gap and through my helmet and through all that water on top of me, and it shouldn't have been able to do any of that, not at this depth, not through steel and rock and that much cold ocean. But it did. Low, structured. A rhythm to it that wasn't a machine's rhythm and wasn't a vent's rhythm either. I've heard boat engines through a hull. I've heard ice cracking through a wall of it. I've heard hydrothermal venting from 300 yards off. This wasn't any of those, and I couldn't make it mean any of those, and I stopped trying. I reached my hand toward the gap. The pitch climbed. I held my hand where it was, halfway to the opening, and the pitch held with it. I moved another few inches closer, and it climbed again. Smooth, no lag, like a hand sliding up a string. I pulled back an inch, and it dropped back down to meet me. It was following my hand. I want to say I thought about that for a while, standing there on the basalt with my light shaking a little in a current that wasn't there. But I didn't think about it. I just held still. 90 seconds. I counted them off against my computer because 90 seconds was the number from the logbook, the interval between pulses that Mitchell had timed to the second. And I wanted to know if it would repeat like that for me too. It didn't repeat. It just held. One long, steady tone at the pitch it had climbed to when I moved close, filling up the whole inside of my helmet with nothing else in the fjord to compete with it. No current. No hull groan off the wreck 300 yards behind me. Just that. Steady. Waiting on me the way you'd wait on someone to finish a sentence. I took my hand back. The tone didn't drop. I looked at the gap a second longer, at the dark inside it, and then I checked my gauge and started up off the basalt. Slow, the cap and the bolts and the warm rock going small below my fins. The tone came with me. It didn't change as I rose, didn't fade the way sound is supposed to fade with distance. It just held there in my ears at the same pitch it had climbed to when I reached for it, riding up through the water with me like it had already decided how far it meant to follow. I went up slow. That's the rule, and I've kept it my whole career. In water, a lot worse than this. Fear and a mistake are two different things. You can carry the first one all the way to the surface, as long as you don't let it turn into the second. At 60 feet, I stopped. Decompression hold. 4 minutes. I'd done this stop 1,000 times without thinking about it, and now I hung there in the dark water thinking about nothing else. I looked down. There was something coming up the column with me. It wasn't the cap. It wasn't wrecked debris, not at this range, not moving the way it was moving. It had a shape to it, roughly a cylinder, 8 or 10 feet across at its widest. But the sides weren't even. My light caught it in patches, bright, then dark, then bright again, like it was catching on something with texture instead of smooth metal or rock. It was rising under its own power. Slow. Patient. In the same water I was in. I stopped moving. It stopped. I eased up 3 feet to test it. It came up 3 feet behind me. The gap held. 30 feet, near enough, and it didn't close and it didn't fall back. I watched it for the whole 4 minutes of that hold, and it stayed exactly where it was, like it had already worked out what a decompression stop is and how far off it needed to sit to let me have mine. I didn't move again until my computer cleared me. Then I went up the last 60 feet as fast as the tables let me, and I didn't look down. I kept my eyes on the hull of the barge coming into shape above me, pale and getting bigger. My hands found the ladder. I pulled myself up onto the Meridian's deck with the tank still strapped to my back, and I sat down right there on the wet steel, and I did not get up. My hands were steady. I looked at them for a while, sitting flat on my knees, not shaking at all, and I couldn't tell you why. Carr's cabin door opened. He came out onto the deck and looked at me sitting there in full gear, dripping, tank and all, and he didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't ask why I wasn't dressed for the cargo bay dive he'd canceled that morning. He just looked at me the way he looked at everything, flat and even, like a man checking a gauge. "The second vessel will be here in 2 hours," he said. "Clean up your gear." Then he went back into his cabin. I sat there with the tank still on my back, looking out past the rail at the water of the passage. Flat, black, nothing moving on it anywhere. I stayed on the deck. My gear was clean and coiled and put away, and there was nothing left to do with my hands, so I sat with them in my lap and watched the water. Around 9, lights showed up at the mouth of the passage, not running lights. A shape, low and dark, moving without any wake I could see from that distance. It came on slow, unhurried. It anchored 200 meters north of us. No name on the hull. No flag at the stern. 80 feet, maybe. A converted research platform. The kind of vessel that has had 3 different lives and has been repainted gray over each one. It sat there in the dark with 2 low deck lights burning and nothing else lit at all. I didn't go below. I told myself I was tired and that was why I stayed up, but that wasn't it. Around 10, 6 men went into the water off its stern. I counted them twice to be sure. They wore gray dry suits, not the black neoprene I was used to seeing on a working boat, and the gear they carried down the ladder wasn't anything I recognized from a supply catalog. One of them had a frame on his back, wide and flat, with a row of what looked like transducers set into it. Another carried something in a hard case that took 2 men to lower, a housing built for a remote unit I'd never seen the shape of before. No lights went on in the water. No radio chatter carried across to us, not on any channel my handheld could pick up, and I tried 3. They worked like that for hours. I watched the surface where they'd gone down, and there was nothing to see, just the black water and the 2 low lights on the platform, and once in a while, a ripple that meant somebody down there had moved. Carr came out onto the deck sometime after that. He had an envelope in his hand. "Contract's complete," he said, and held it out to me. "Water taxi will be at the barge at 0600. I opened it. A check, Pacific Basin Recovery letterhead, and the number on it was 3 times what I'd signed for. I looked at it for a second, then folded it once and put it in my breast pocket. Then I looked past him at the water, at the platform, at where the men had gone down. "What's in the borehole?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. He stood there next to me at the rail, watching the same dark patch of water I was watching, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to say anything at all. "The cutter's crew asked the same thing," he said. That was it. He turned and went back to his cabin, and the door closed, and I heard nothing else from behind it. No safe this time, just the latch. I stood at the rail a while longer. Every other thing Carr had said to me in 3 days could have meant 2 things: the satellite phone calls he took below deck, the way he closed that logbook without his face changing. Breach confirmed. 48 hours. All of it could have been paperwork, could have been a man managing a chain of custody if I wanted it to be. I had wanted it to be. That sentence didn't have a second meaning. The cutter's crew asked the same thing. So had Mitchell, and so had whoever wrote those last 3 words in a hand that wasn't Mitchell's. And 4 days later, the Resolute Bay went down in a storm that Carr's own company would later call weather. Carr knew what was in that hole before I ever went into the water above it. He sent me down anyway. I sat back down on the deck. I didn't go to my bunk. I told myself I'd sleep after, and I didn't believe it even as I thought it. The gray-suited team kept working past midnight. I watched the ripples come and go on the black water, watched the 2 low lights on the platform, and somewhere around 3 in the morning the divers surfaced. I saw the shapes of them climbing the ladder one at a time, 6 of them, none of them talking, or none of them talking loud enough to carry. Then the platform's lights went dark. It didn't leave. I waited for the sound of an engine, for a wake, for anything, and none of it came. It just sat there, 200 meters off our bow, black on black, anchored in the direction of that bearing like it had never intended to be anywhere else. The passage went still, no wind, no current sound against the hull. I sat on the deck with the check folded in my pocket and the fjord lying flat and empty in front of me, and I didn't move. The taxi came at 6:10, right on time, a low gray hull with a single deck lamp cutting through the mist that hadn't burned off yet. I loaded my gear in silence, tanks, fins, the bag with my regulator. Nobody helped me and nobody talked to me, and that was fine. The Meridian sat where it had sat all night. The other vessel sat 200 meters off it, still dark, still anchored on that bearing like it had grown there. I didn't look for Carr on deck. I don't know if he was watching me go. We rounded the southern headland a few minutes later and the passage closed behind us, the walls swinging shut on both boats at once, and then there was nothing back there but rock and water and the gray coming up slow in the east. I didn't open the dive computer until we were well south of Nootka Island, out where the swell starts to roll long and the land drops away on both sides. I don't know why I waited. Maybe I didn't want to do it inside the fjord. I thumbed through to the photo directory. The file names were all there, in order, time-stamped from the second dive, the one nobody sanctioned. Borehole cap, sheared bolts, the gap between cap and basalt, the depression in the silt from the day before that. I opened the first one and it was black, not dark. Black the way a screen is black when there's nothing behind it. I opened the second, the third. Same. The file sizes read 0 bytes, every one of them, and I sat there in the stern of that taxi with the engine noise going, and I checked the right timestamps out of habit, the same as I'd check a gauge. 3:14 in the morning. I had been on the deck of the Meridian at 3:14 in the morning. I had watched 6 men in gray dry suits climb a ladder at 3 o'clock, and I had sat there afterward, watching their platform go dark, for most of an hour before I finally went below. The computer had been in my bunk the whole time. Locked cabin, locked bunk, the way I always leave it. Someone had gone in while I sat outside watching the water. I scrolled back to the manifest photographs, the ones from the very first dive, the job I'd actually been contracted to do. Those were intact. Every file opened clean, the clipboard sharp under my strobe, the bulkhead behind it exactly as I remembered it. Only the other set was gone, which meant whoever did it knew which files were which, knew what I'd found before I told anyone. I sat with the computer in my lap for a long time after that, watching the wake fold out behind us, and I didn't say anything to the 2 crew running the taxi, and they didn't ask. 6 weeks later, I was back on the mainland when Pacific Basin Recovery put out its report on the Resolute Bay. 11 pages. Cause of loss listed as storm damage to the hull, consistent with the weather on record for the night she went down. There was a section on hull stress, a section on recovered debris, a section on the search and rescue timeline. The cargo manifest ran as an appendix at the back, my photographs reproduced in grainy black and white, exactly what I'd been paid to bring up. No logbook, no radio room, no bearing, no depth, no borehole, nothing below the seabed at all. I read it twice, and then I went looking for the incident report Transport Canada had filed at the time, the one that predates any of this, the one nobody dresses up for insurance. Watch Officer Joey Mitchell, lost at sea, body not recovered. 1 other crew member listed the same way. 4 survivors. I found the signature block near the back, where Mitchell had signed off on an earlier report months before the sinking, routine stuff, fuel logs and inspection sign-offs. I held it up next to a photograph I still had of the logbook's final page, the one I'd shot before I ever handed the book to Carr. A habit, nothing more, something I did on every dive. The hand that wrote it answered 310 feet, 042, was the same hand that had signed those fuel logs. Same slant, same close-set lowercase letters, same way of crossing a 7. Mitchell had written the first 2 entries in his usual log hand, careful and square, despite nobody answering the radio when he logged the anomaly. Mitchell had also written the last one. I sat there a long time with the incident report open in front of me and the photograph beside it, matching the letters one against the other, and I didn't move. Mitchell wrote all 3 entries, and 4 days after he wrote it, Mitchell went down with the cutter. I still work salvage diving. That part didn't change. In the 18 months since Nootka Passage, I've taken 3 contracts: a tanker off Sable Island, a container ship outside Prince Rupert, sitting in open water with room to breathe on every side, a pipeline inspection south of the border I won't name, all open water. None of them in a fjord, and I've turned down 2 jobs that were. I cashed the check, triple the contracted amount, and it cleared, and I didn't send it back or burn it or do any of the things a man in a story might do. I bought a truck with part of it. That doesn't mean I'm done thinking about the rest. I've tried to build a version of each piece I could live inside. The borehole I can build. Cold War infrastructure, something the Department of National Defense sealed in 1971 and never got around to decommissioning. Decommissioning costs money, and nobody wants to file the paperwork on a thing they'd rather forget they built. The coast is full of that. Hydrophone arrays nobody talks about. Listening posts under kelp beds. A sealed hole that didn't stay sealed isn't the strangest thing that's ever come up off this coast. The logbook I can build. A watch officer who caught something on sonar he wasn't supposed to catch. And a radio that nobody on the other end would answer, because whoever should have answered already knew what he was hearing and had decided not to say so. The photographs I can build. 6 men in gray dry suits with equipment I've never seen in a civilian catalog have the access to reach into a locked bunk on an anchored barge and put a 0-byte file where a photograph used to be. I don't love that version, but I can walk myself to it. Carr's last sentence I can build too if I want to. A man who knew what was under that fjord floor before I ever touched a regulator, and who sent me down anyway because that was the job, and who told me so in the only sentence he had that didn't have 2 ways of hearing it. The cutter's crew asked the same thing. Every one of those has a shape I can get most of the way around, even if I can't close my hand on it. The thing in the water doesn't. Not its size. I could live with the size, not the texture on it, the way my light broke up uneven across its length instead of running smooth. I could live with that too, tell myself it was silt, current. My own eyes doing what eyes do at 60 feet after 22 minutes at depth. I could build a version of the shape itself. Something large. Something that lives where nothing should. Something the Department of National Defense sealed a hole over in 1971 for a reason nobody wrote down. What I can't build a version of is how it held. It stopped when I stopped. It rose when I rose. 3 feet, and it gave me 3 feet. That alone I could argue myself past. Animals track a moving thing. That's not strange. That's just what a body in the water does when another body is in the water with it. But it held 30 feet below me, exactly, for 4 minutes. And 4 minutes is not a number I chose. 4 minutes was my decompression stop. It's the number written into the dive tables, the hold every diver takes at 60 feet so the nitrogen in his blood has time to leave without tearing him open on the way out. I didn't pick 30 feet either. 30 feet is a safe distance from a diver decompressing. It's not close enough to threaten him and not far enough to lose him. Something down there gave me both of those numbers. Not close, not once, not on approach, and not on the way out. It knew where the edge of my hold was, and it knew how far off to sit from it. And it sat there the whole 4 minutes. And when my 4 minutes ended and I started up again, so did it, holding the same 30 feet, all the way to where I stopped looking. A creature follows a diver. I've had seals shadow me on a wreck before, curious, keeping pace, close enough to touch if either of us wanted that. What held 30 feet under me for 4 minutes wasn't following. It was observing a protocol. It knew what a decompression stop was for. It knew the distance that wouldn't kill me, and it gave me exactly that distance and not an inch more. I'm telling this now because Mitchell is still listed as lost at sea, body not recovered, and I don't believe that anymore. I think Mitchell logged a bearing and a depth and 2 words that weren't his usual 2 words. And I think whatever he was answering came up through 310 feet of basalt to meet him part way. The same as it came up to meet me at 60 feet in the dark 18 months later. I have no photographs of any of it. The report is 11 pages, and none of those pages are mine. What I have is 4 minutes I can still count out in my head if I close my eyes, and the knowledge that a Coast Guard crew asked the same question I went down and asked, and 2 of them never came back up to answer for it. The borehole doesn't keep me up. Neither does the logbook, or the check, or the safe closing, or Carr's last sentence, which I've turned over enough times now that it's gone smooth in my hands like a stone. What I can't put down is this. It isn't what was sealed in that hole in 1971 that I can't live with a version of. It's that whatever came up out of it already knew exactly how far away it had to stay.